The cargo ship Meridian shuddered violently as it tore through the atmosphere of the uncharted planet. Captain James Hartford gripped the controls with white knuckles, his years of experience barely keeping the vessel from spinning completely out of control. Warning lights flashed red across his dashboard while the ship's computer screamed alerts in multiple languages. "Come on, baby, stay with me," James muttered through gritted teeth, fighting to keep the nose up as the ground rushed toward him. At terrifying speed, the ion drive had failed 3 hours ago, leaving him with nothing but emergency thrusters and pure determination. The impact came like a thunderclap. Metal screamed against rock and soil as the Meridian carved a deep furrow through the forest floor, snapping ancient trees like twigs. James felt his restraints dig into his chest as the ship bounced and rolled before finally coming to rest against a massive boulder. Silence fell like a blanket, broken only by the hiss of escaping coolant and the groan of settling metal. James tasted blood in his mouth and felt warmth trickling down his forehead. His left arm hung at an odd angle, definitely broken, but he was alive, which was more than he had expected 30 seconds ago. The cargo hold had torn open during the crash, spilling crates of medical supplies and terraforming equipment across the forest floor. James managed to unbuckle himself with his good arm and stumbled outside, marveling at his first glimpse of an alien world. The twin suns hung in a lavender sky, casting everything in an ethereal purple glow. The trees towered impossibly high, their silver bark gleaming like metal and their leaves shimmering with an inner light. Strange bird-like creatures, with gossamer wings, flitted between the branches, their songs like wind chimes in a gentle breeze.
Activated.
James activated his emergency beacon, knowing it would be days or even weeks before a rescue ship could reach this remote system. He needed shelter, water, and medical attention for his injuries. The ship's medkit was intact, but his broken arm needed proper setting. As he gathered supplies with his good hand, a movement in the tree line caught his eye. He froze, suddenly aware that he had no idea what kind of predators might inhabit this world. The Universal Protocol required extreme caution on first contact situations, but his current circumstances hardly qualified as standard. A figure emerged from behind one of the massive trees, and James felt his breath catch in his throat. She walked with fluid grace, her movements so perfectly balanced they seemed almost choreographed. Her skin held a subtle blue luminescence that seemed to pulse gently with her heartbeat, and her hair fell in cascading waves of deep violet that caught the light of the twin suns. It was clearly not human, yet undeniably beautiful in a way that transcended species. Her features were delicate but strong, with large eyes that held flecks of silver and gold. She wore flowing garments that seemed to be woven from the same gossamer material as the creature's wings, and intricate patterns of what looked like living light traced along her arms and neck. James raised his good hand slowly, palmed forward, in the universal gesture of peace. "Hello," he said softly, his voice barely carrying across the distance between them. "I mean no harm." The alien woman tilted her head, studying him with obvious curiosity rather than fear. She spoke in a voice like flowing water, her words musical but completely incomprehensible. When James shook his head to indicate he didn't understand, she stepped closer, her expression shifting to one of concern as she noticed his injuries. She pointed to his broken arm and made a sound that was clearly a question. James nodded, cradling the injured limb against his chest, without hesitation. She moved toward him, her hands outstretched in a gesture that seemed to span species boundaries, the offering of help. Up close, James could see that her luminescent skin bore intricate tattoos or markings that pulsed with soft light, shifting patterns that seemed to respond to her emotions. When she gently touched his arm, examining the break with surprisingly knowledgeable fingers, the patterns brightened noticeably. She made another musical sound and gestured toward the forest. James understood immediately that she was offering to take him somewhere safer, perhaps somewhere she could tend to his injuries properly. He looked back at his crashed ship, then at this beautiful stranger who had appeared like an angel in his darkest moment. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford in his situation, but something in her eyes, some quality that transcended the barriers between their species, made the decision easy. He nodded and allowed her to guide him deeper into the alien forest. They walked for nearly an hour through terrain that seemed designed by an artist rather than evolution. Flowers the size of dinner plates bloomed in impossible colors, their petals transparent and filled with swirling patterns of light. Streams of crystal-clear water wound between the trees, and James could see that even the rocks beneath the surface glowed with their own inner fire. His guide, whom he had begun thinking of as his angel, moved through this wonderland with practiced ease, occasionally pausing to help him navigate particularly difficult terrain. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, following paths that were invisible to James but clearly well known to her. Finally, they emerged into a clearing dominated by what could only be described as a living building. The structure seemed to have grown rather than been built. Its walls formed from the same silver-barked trees but shaped into rooms and corridors. Gossamer curtains hung in doorways, and soft light emanated from within without any visible source. The alien woman led him inside, and James found himself in something between a home and a palace. The furniture seemed to be grown from the same living wood as the walls, but carved with incredible artistry and attention to comfort. Tapestries that moved like water hung from the walls, depicting scenes of alien cities and landscapes that took his breath away. She guided him to what was clearly a healing chamber, where she began examining his injuries with the skill of a trained medic. Her touch was gentle but sure as she cleaned the cut on his forehead and began preparing materials. To set his broken arm, the tools she used were unlike anything in James's experience, seeming to be grown rather than manufactured, but their purpose was unmistakable. As she worked, she spoke in her musical language, her tone soothing and encouraging, even though James couldn't understand the words. He found himself responding in English, describing his journey and the crash. Knowing she couldn't understand, but somehow feeling that the communication was important anyway, when she finished treating his injuries, she brought him food that was unlike anything he had ever tasted, but somehow perfectly suited to his human physiology. The flavors were complex and satisfying, and James realized that this woman possessed knowledge that went far beyond simple first aid. As the alien sun set beyond the windows, casting the chamber in soft twilight, James looked at his rescuer and felt something he hadn't expected. Gratitude, certainly, and admiration for her skill and kindness. But there was something deeper, something that seemed to reach across the vast differences between their species and touch something fundamental in both of them. She seemed to sense his gaze and looked up from where she was storing her medical supplies. Their eyes met across the chamber, and in that moment, James felt the first stirring of something that would change both their lives forever. Love, he realized, truly knew no boundaries, not even those between worlds. 3 days had passed since the crash, and James was beginning to understand that his beautiful rescuer was far more than she had first appeared. Her name, he had learned through patient repetition and gestures, was Zelina. Da-da-da-da. The musical way she spoke, it made it sound like a prayer, and James found himself repeating it softly when she wasn't listening, enjoying the way it felt on his tongue. Zelina had proven to be an incredibly quick learner when it came to his language. She absorbed English words with startling speed, her musical voice giving even the simplest phrases an otherworldly beauty. By the morning of the 4th day, they were managing basic conversations, though her grammar remained charmingly uncertain. "James of Earth," she said, settling beside him as he watched the twin suns rise through the gossamer curtains. "People, they come for you soon?" "I hope so," James replied, though he found himself oddly reluctant to think about rescue. "My ship sent out a distress signal before I crashed, but this system is very far from the main shipping routes. It could be weeks before anyone finds me." Zelina nodded thoughtfully, her luminescent patterns shifting to deeper blues as she processed this information. "Perhaps this is fortune, not misfortune," she said carefully. "Time to heal, time to understand." James studied her profile as she gazed out at the forest. There was a sadness in her expression that he had noticed before. Wait, that seemed too heavy for someone who moved with such natural grace. "Zelina," he said gently, "why are you here alone? This place is beautiful, but it feels like a hiding place." Her patterns flared brighter for a moment, betraying her emotional response before she could control it. She was quiet for so long that James thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am daughter of King Theron of Astoria," she said, the words seeming to cost her great effort. "Princess Zelina, heir to throne of 7 worlds, but I am also prisoner of my blood." James felt his breath catch. A princess. He had been rescued by alien royalty, which explained both her obvious education and the incredible sophistication of her forest retreat. "What do you mean, prisoner?" Zelina's hands clenched in her lap, her patterns now cycling through rapid shifts of color that James was beginning to recognize as distress. "My father makes alliance with the Krathan Empire. Old enemies become friends through marriage bond. I am to wed Prince Jorek of Krathan, a man whose heart is as cold as the void between stars." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, transcending the barriers of language and species. James felt an unexpected surge of anger at this Prince Jorek, whoever he was. "But you ran away?" "I escaped," Zelina corrected, a note of pride entering her voice. 3 months ago, on night before betrothal ceremony, I took father's fastest ship and fled to this world, a place I discovered in my youth when I studied with the forest healers. Here, I am not Princess Zelina. Here, I am only myself. James reached out instinctively and covered her hand with his. The moment their skin touched, both of them froze. The contact sent an electric thrill through James. That had nothing to do with any alien energy and everything to do with the woman beside him. Zelina's patterns flared into brilliant gold, and she stared down at their joined hands with wonder. "Among my people," she said softly, "when patterns show gold, it means the heart recognizes its match. I have never shown gold before, not even for Prince Jorek." "What does that mean?" James asked, though he suspected he already knew. "It means the soul has found its other half," Zelina whispered, her eyes meeting his. "But such a thing between our kinds, it is impossible. You are human. I am Astorian. Our worlds, our peoples, they would never accept such a bond." James squeezed her hand gently. "My people have a saying, love finds a way. Maybe that's true, even between the stars." Over the following days, their connection deepened with every shared moment. Zelina showed James the wonders of her forest sanctuary, explaining the incredible ecosystem that surrounded them. The luminescent plants, she told him, were actually a form of living technology, grown rather than built, capable of producing everything from medicine to complex machinery. "Your people create with metal and circuits," she explained as they walked beside one of the crystal streams. "My people create with life itself. We grow our cities, nurture our ships, cultivate our tools. Everything lives. Everything is connected." James was fascinated by every detail. "It's incredible. Your civilization must be thousands of years more advanced than ours." "Advanced in some ways," Zelina agreed. "But we have lost much that your people still possess. We have forgotten how to dream of impossible things. We've become too careful, too focused on preservation. Your species, you reach always for the stars, even when they seem too far to touch." In the evenings, they would sit together in the main chamber, sharing stories of their respective worlds. James told her about Earth's vast oceans and towering mountains, about cities that never slept and forests that stretched beyond the horizon. He described snow and rain, things that didn't exist on Zelina's desert homeworld, and watched her eyes light up with wonder. Zelina, in turn, painted pictures with her words of the crystal spires of Astoria, of floating gardens that danced in 3 dimensions, of the great libraries where knowledge itself took physical form and could be touched and shaped like clay. She told him about the Festival of 7 Moons, when all of Astoria's worlds aligned and the night sky became a canvas of impossible beauty. "I would show you," she said one evening, her patterns shifting to soft silver with longing. "If things were different, I would take you to see the singing canyons of Veltar, where the wind plays music that can make you weep with joy. I would share with you the nectar of the Golden Grove, which tastes like liquid starlight. And I would show you Earth's sunrise over the Pacific Ocean," James replied, lost in the dream she was weaving. "I would take you to the beaches of New Zealand, where the sand is so white it hurts your eyes, and the water is so blue it looks like pieces of sky fell to earth." As they talked, they unconsciously moved closer together, drawn by the magnetic pull that seemed to exist between them. When Zelina's head came to rest against James's shoulder, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Her patterns had settled into a steady, warm gold that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "James," she whispered into the quiet of the chamber, "what will happen when your people come for you?" The question hung between them like a physical presence. James had been asking himself the same thing every day since he had begun to fall in love with this incredible woman from another world. "I don't know," he admitted. "I know what protocol says. I know what duty demands. But I also know that I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you." Zelina lifted her head to look at him, her silver and gold eyes searching his face. "Among my people, we have a ceremony called the Binding of Souls. It is older than our written history, older than our technology. When two hearts recognize each other truly, they can choose to become one spirit in two bodies. But it has never been performed between different species. Would you want that?" James asked, his heart pounding. "With me, more than anything," Zelina replied without hesitation. "But James, you must understand what it would mean. To bind with me would make you part of Astorian nobility. My father would never allow it. Prince Jorok would demand satisfaction in combat. Your own people might reject you for choosing an alien bride." James cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the way her patterns responded to his touch, brightening and swirling in complex patterns that spoke of joy and desire and love beyond words. "Zelina, in 3 days you've shown me wonders I never dreamed possible. You've healed not just my body, but something inside me I didn't even know was broken. Loving you means facing the whole universe, then so be it." As if in response to his words, a soft chiming sound echoed through the chamber. Zelina's patterns flared bright red, and she was on her feet in an instant, her entire posture shifting to one of alertness and fear. "What is it?" James asked, rising beside her. "Detection." "Sensors," Zelina said, her voice tight with worry. "Someone has entered this system. Someone is coming." Through the gossamer windows, they could see lights moving in the purple sky, growing brighter by the moment. James felt his heart sink as he realized what those lights most likely represented. His rescue had arrived, but instead of relief, all he felt was the crushing weight of impending loss. "It could be your people," Zelina said, though her tone suggested she feared it might be something else entirely. "Or it could be yours," James replied, pulling her close as the lights continued to grow brighter. "Either way, our time in paradise is ending." As they stood together, watching the approaching ships, both of them knew that whatever happened next would determine not just their individual fates, but the future of the love that had bloomed between them like one of the forest's impossible flowers, beautiful and rare, and seemingly too fragile to survive in the harsh light of reality. The ships that descended through the purple sky were definitely not human in design. Where Earth vessels were built for efficiency and function, these craft moved like living things, their hulls flowing with the same organic curves that characterized all Astorian technology. Zelina's patterns had shifted to deep crimson, a color James had learned meant extreme danger. "Royal guard ships," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing hum of the approaching vessels. "My father has found me." 3 ships settled into the clearing around Zelina's sanctuary with barely a whisper of displaced air. Their hulls seemed to pulse with their own inner light, and as ramps extended from their bellies, figures in flowing robes began to emerge. At their head walked a tall man whose bearing spoke of absolute authority, his robes more elaborate than the others, and his patterns glowing with royal blue and silver. "Princess Zelina," the man called out in accented but clear English, apparently. Having detected James's presence through some unknown means, "you will present yourself immediately. You have caused enough shame to the royal house." Zelina straightened, and James watched in fascination as she transformed before his eyes. Gone was the gentle healer who had cared for his wounds. In her place stood a princess of the blood, every inch of her radiating the kind of authority that came from generations of royal breeding. "General Hadron," she replied, her voice carrying easily across the clearing. "I am Princess Zelina, heir to 7 worlds. I do not present myself to anyone save my father the king." The general's patterns flared with obvious irritation, but he bowed slightly in acknowledgement of her rank. Your Highness, your father the king commands your immediate return to Astoria. The alliance with the Krathan Empire hangs in the balance. Prince Jorok grows impatient for his bride. Then let Prince Jorok find another bride, Zelina replied coldly. I will not be bartered like goods in a marketplace, not even for the good of the realm. New voice cut through the tension like a blade. Perhaps the princess requires motivation to remember her duty. The figure that emerged from the second ship made James's blood run cold. Where the general moved with military precision, this newcomer radiated a casual cruelty that set every instinct James possessed on high alert. His robes were black and silver, and his patterns pulsed with colors James had never seen on Zelina. Dark purples and blood reds that spoke of violence and domination. Prince Jorok, Zelina said, her voice steady, despite the fear James could see in the rigid line of her shoulders. I did not expect my betrothed to soil his hands with retrieval missions. Prince Jorok smiled, an expression that held no warmth whatsoever. When one's property goes missing, one does what is necessary to retrieve it, though I confess myself curious about this human pet you seem to have acquired. The casual dismissal in his tone sparked a rage in James that surprised him with its intensity. Without thinking, he stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Zelina in a gesture that was unmistakably protective. I'm Captain James Hartford of the Earth Merchant Marine, he said clearly, and Princess Zelina is no one's property. The prince's patterns flared brighter, and James saw several of the guards reach for weapons that seemed to grow from there. Very clothing. Ah, the pet speaks. How amusing. Tell me, human, do you understand what you have stumbled into? I understand that you're threatening someone I care about, James replied, his voice steady, despite the obvious danger. And where I come from, that's enough to make it my business. God. Jorok actually laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Care about? Oh, this is rich. The alien thinks he can form attachments to his betters. General Hadron killed this creature and... Let us be done with this farce. Wait, Zelina stepped forward, her patterns blazing with gold so bright it was almost painful to look at. I invoke the right of challenge. This matter will be settled according to the old laws, not through murder. The general looked genuinely shocked. Your Highness, the right of challenge has not been invoked in over 3 centuries. Surely you cannot be serious. I am entirely serious, Zelina replied. I claim the right to choose my own champion in single combat against any who would force me into unwilling marriage. If my champion wins, I am free to choose my own path. If he loses, I will submit to my father's will without further protest. Prince Jorok's patterns had shifted to amused satisfaction. How delightfully archaic. And I suppose you intend for your human pet to serve as this champion? A creature barely recovered from his injuries, armed with nothing but primitive human technology against a prince of Krathan trained from birth in the warrior arts. If he's willing, Zelina said, turning to look at James with eyes that held both hope and terror. James, you don't have to do this. There are other ways. James looked into her face, seeing the woman who had saved his life, who had shown him wonders beyond imagination, who had opened her heart to a stranger from another world. Then he looked at Prince Jorok, seeing the cruelty and arrogance that would destroy everything beautiful about the woman he loved. I'll do it, he said simply, but I want something in return. Name it, Zelina breathed. If I win, you come with me. Not as my property, not as a prize to be won, but as my partner. We find a way to make this work between our peoples, but we do it together. Zelina's patterns exploded into pure gold, so bright that even the guards had to shield their eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, James of Earth. In victory or defeat, my heart is yours. The combat circle was drawn in the traditional manner, using stones that pulsed with their own inner light. James was offered traditional Astorian weapons, but he declined in favor of the plasma pistol from his ship's emergency kit. It wasn't much, but it was familiar, and in a fight like this, familiarity might make the difference. Prince Jorok entered the circle, armed with what could only be described as a sword made of solidified light. its blade humming with barely contained energy. His movements were fluid and confident, the product of decades of training and countless victories. "Last chance to surrender, human," Jorok said as they faced each other across the circle. "I might allow you to live as Zelina's servant after I have properly trained her obedience." The words were clearly designed to provoke, and they succeeded admirably. James felt the cold calm of combat settle over him, the same state that had saved his life in dozens of dangerous situations throughout his career as a pilot. He had never been a soldier, but he had survived pirates and asteroid fields and the 1,000 other dangers of space. He could survive this too. The prince attacked with lightning speed, his light blade carving glowing arcs through the air. James rolled aside, feeling the heat of the weapon pass inches from his face. He came up firing, but Jorok moved like liquid mercury, the plasma bolts passing harmlessly through empty air. For long minutes they danced around each other, Jorok pressing his advantage in speed and training, James using every trick he had learned in a lifetime of dangerous work. He couldn't match the prince's skill, but he could be unpredictable, using tactics no formal training would have taught. The breakthrough came when James feinted left, then dove right and rolled between Jorok's legs, coming up behind him with his pistol pressed against the base of the prince's skull. In the sudden silence that followed, James could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "Yield," he said quietly. For a moment James thought the prince would comply. Then Jorok spun with inhuman speed, his elbow catching James in the ribs and sending him stumbling backward. The light blade swept toward James's chest in a killing stroke. It never connected. Lena had thrown herself between them and the blade. That would have killed James instead, pierced her shoulder, sending her to her knees with a cry of pain. Her patterns flared white-hot with agony, and James felt something break inside his chest at the sight. Zelina, he caught her as she fell, his hands immediately going to the wound. The blade had missed anything vital, but she was losing blood quickly, her patterns fading from gold to pale silver. Prince Jorok stood over them, his blade raised for another strike. How touching. The alien princess dies for her pet. Perhaps I should make this a double execution. The plasma bolt took him center mass, fired from point-blank range by a man driven beyond reason by the sight of the woman he loved, bleeding in his arms. Prince Jorok's eyes widened in shock. Then he toppled backward, his light blade dissolving. As his grip failed, in the stunned silence that followed, General Hadron stepped forward. "The challenge is concluded," he announced formally. "Prince Jorok is defeated. Princess Zelina is free to choose her own path according to the ancient laws." James barely heard him. All his attention was focused on Zelina, who was trying to speak despite her pain. "James," she whispered, her hand finding his face. "Father will never accept this. There will be war between our peoples if I go with you." "Then we'll face it together," James replied, pressing his lips to her forehead. "No matter what comes, we face it together." 2 weeks later, the combined fleet of Earth and Astoria hung in space above the planet where two hearts had found each other. The diplomatic negotiations had been complex, involving trade agreements and mutual defense pacts and a dozen other political necessities. But at the heart of it all was a simple truth that transcended politics and prejudice. Love it. Seemed really could find a way. James stood on the observation deck of the Earth's flagship, watching the stars wheel slowly past the viewport. Beside him, Zelina wore the formal robes of an Astorian ambassador, her patterns glowing with steady gold contentment. "No regrets?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "Only one," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I regret that it took a crash landing for us to find each other. Think of all the time we could have had." James smiled, remembering the words she had spoken on that first day. Maybe that wasn't misfortune. Maybe it was fortune after all. Time to heal. Time to understand. Time to love, Zelina added, her patterns brightening as she looked up at him. "Time to love," James agreed, and kissed the woman who had taught him that some crashes were really just landings in disguise, bringing you exactly where you were meant to be. Round them, the stars bore witness to a love that had bridged worlds, a testament to the truth that some things truly were universal. And in the distance, both Earth and Astoria waited to welcome the couple who had proven that the greatest adventure of all was not the conquest of space, but the discovery of a heart that matched your own.